Hey guys, welcome back to the Curly Reader. My name's Amanda, and today I'm going to share with you my top 5 middle grade reads of 2020. So this is part of my kind of end of year favorites series that I've put together, where I share with you my favorite books of 2020. In this video, I share with you my favorite middle grade picks. The other videos cover my just kind of general picks, everything, my top 5. I also have my 5 favorite graphic novels and my 5 favorite audiobooks of the year as well. So I will leave a playlist of the videos that have already gone out down below in the description box. So feel free to check that out if you want to see any of the other books that were my favorites from 2020. So let's kind of get into this. These will be ranked in order from least favorite to favorite. So yeah, in the number 5 spot is Everything Else in the Universe by Tracy Holzer. This is one that I have talked a ton about this year. This was a cover read for me. I had never heard of this book before. I saw the cover on Book Outlet, picked it up because the premise sounded good. All I really knew about it was that it was set during the Vietnam War and it had to do with a kid whose father was an amputee veteran. So he lost his arm in the war. That's all I knew going into it. And whoo, buddy, did this one so surprised me, you guys. It was so well written. It was so good. It follows our main character, Lucia, who comes from a very large Italian family. And her dad was called up for medical draft. So he was a doctor and he was drafted into the Vietnam War. And he ends up coming back without an arm. And so his career is kind of gone. He doesn't really know how to mentally move forward. And she's really struggling with how to support her dad. She misses who he used to be. And it was a family dream of theirs that he was going to be a surgeon, and now he can't. And so it's kind of about how she's dealing with watching her father go through this. In the process, she meets a neighbor boy who they kind of go on this adventure, so to say. They find a Medal of Honor buried in a garden, like in a back garden along a creek, and they're trying to figure out whose it is so they can return it to its rightful owner. In that process, they end up visiting the VFW and kind of the veterans homes in the area to talk with some veterans about who it could possibly belong to. And you really get a picture of how the veterans during the Vietnam War viewed Vietnam veterans. And it was not great. It was far from great, guys. It also talks, when her dad comes home, it talks about how the public viewed Vietnam veterans. It talks a lot about just the political climate in the country surrounding the war and how she's dealing with that, how her dad's dealing with that, how their family is dealing with that. You learn a lot about her friend and kind of his story. It's a lot. It is so beautiful. So well written. Highly, highly recommend you find this and pick it up. That's number 5. In the number 4 spot is The Remarkable Journey of Coyote Sunrise by Dan Gemeinhart. This is one that I read during middle grade March upon the recommendation of Krista, I believe. And this follows our main character, Coyote, whose mother has passed away, and her dad now live on a school bus. They converted the school bus to kind of be an RV, and they have been just kind of roaming, and they've been kind of living the nomadic lifestyle ever since. And she finds out that the park in her hometown is being torn down, and she wants to get home before that happens. But her dad will not return to her hometown. So she's trying to figure out how to trick her dad into driving back to her hometown without letting him know. And it's just kind of their journey along the way. There's a lot of confronting grief in this book. There's a lot of kind of harder topics that are brought up. But it's really a story just about grief and about her and her dad and how they grieve differently and how they come together in the end. And it is beautiful. This is a book that made me like sob, like heaving sob. It's so beautiful. So that is in my number 4 spot. All right, in my number 3 spot is Free Lunch by Rex Ogle. This is another cover read for me. I was just kind of perusing the shelves at my library, looking through the nonfiction section during middle grade March, trying to find a nonfiction book that kind of struck my fancy, and this one jumped out at me, and I read it, and I'm so glad that I did. You guys, this book was, oh my goodness, so good. It's a nonfiction book, so it is Rex Ogle's account, memoir, I guess, of his life growing up in poverty. He got signed up for free lunch, and it kind of talks about the stigma attached to that. It talks about some of the things that he went through at school. It talks a lot about the emotional, the anger that he had towards his mom for not being able to provide for him. It talks about, there's child abuse in here, there's child neglect in here. Very hard to read. I would not recommend just handing this to a middle grade child for sure. But for kids who are there going through that, I think that it's beautiful that this book exists. But it was a very, very difficult book to read, but it was so impactful, especially as someone who did not go through that experience. It really opened my eyes to how kids who do go through this, how they feel, how they are perceived, how they perceive others. It was very eye-opening. I highly, highly recommend this book if you are up for it. So yeah, that was my number 3 spot. All right, my number 2 spot and my number 1 spot are both by the same author. So in the number 2 spot is Fighting Words by Kimberly Brubaker Bradley. This is a book that I read. I buddy read this with Krista from Books and Jams and Katie at Life Between Words. And it is a book that was profoundly impacting. It is a book that talks about sexual assault with children from the point of view of a child. And it is a book written for children that covers this topic. It was very, very difficult to read, especially as a mother. But it is a book that, once again, that I'm so glad it exists. I think it's so important for kids who have gone through something like this to be able to see that they're not alone. But this book also talks about how to be a friend to somebody who has gone through this. What is the right thing to do? How do you handle these situations? How do you stand by somebody's side and support them when they're struggling and they don't have the words to tell you what's going on? It covers the topic of consent, not just from a sexual point of view, but from any physical touch point of view. It talks about the school system and how it, can do better. It talks about the foster system. There are definite trigger warnings in this book, obviously for sexual assault, child molestation, attempted suicide, depression. All of those things are referenced in this book, and it's difficult to read, but it's so important. Highly encourage adults out there to check this out and then read it with your children, because it provides opportunity for such important conversations to be happening. So yeah, that goes in my number 2 spot. And then my favorite middle grade book of 2020. This was actually kind of hard to order all of these, but when I came down to it, I came down to what book would I just throw in the hands of everybody and say, you need to read this, and that would be Jeffersons Sons by Kimberly Brubaker Bradley. This is a book about Thomas Jefferson's sons that he had with his slave Sally Hemings. This was a book that changed my perspective of our founding fathers in a very profound way. Not in a disrespectful way, but just as these were not perfect people. I knew they weren't perfect people. Let's not kid anybody here. But this book is told from the point of view of these kids. There's 3 different kids. 2 are sons of Thomas Jefferson, and 1 is another slave boy in Monticello. And this book covers the topic of what it was like for them to grow up craving the love of a father that they would never get. To the emotional harm that comes from knowing that your father owns you and will never acknowledge that he is your father. And seeing your mother sacrifice so much of herself for her children. This is a book that talks about Thomas Jefferson's life and the facade that he put up for a lot of people, and kind of what was going on behind the scenes. It is fiction. It's historical fiction. There are a lot of gaps that, we don't really know a whole lot about. And so Kimberly Brubaker Bradley filled in the gaps. But she did it in such a way that you could really see what was happening, and it's definitely possible that things went down the way they did. This book, I still remember, when I think about this book, I think about the way I was feeling when I read the last page, and the combination of sobbing and wanting to throw up that I had, I will never forget. It was horrifying and heartbreaking, and just, I loved it. This book was so good. So it goes in the number 1 spot. This is my favorite, and it's a backlist book, so there's no excuse not to go read it. It was just, Kimberly Brubaker Bradley has completely 100% solidified herself as probably one in my top 3 middle grade authors ever. So there you have it. Those are my top 5 favorite middle grade books of 2020. If you have read any of these, I would love to hear your comments about them down below in the description box. If you have not, I would love to hear what is a middle grade book that you read this past year that you absolutely loved, or what is a middle grade book you're looking forward to reading this next year. That's going to do it for today. So I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope that you stick around and subscribe. And until next time, see ya.